Hi, I'm Andy Lopata. I'm the co-author of the Financial Times Guide to Mentoring. Best advice I ever got was not to be attached to the outcome. Just do things and see what happens.
Ooh, that's beautiful advice. When did you get that? How has that helped you, Andy?
I got that on a business accelerator course run by a guy called Beju Solanki just before the pandemic hit. It's an acronym, NATO, not attached to the outcome. And it's so powerful because we prejudge things that we do, and we stop to question everything, and it's the enemy of risk. It's the enemy of innovation. So if you just try things and see what happens, you never know where it might go.
I love that. I love
Me
that.
too.
And
Me
it's an
too.
acronym too. So that
It's an
makes it
acronym.
easy to remember.
Yeah,
I enjoy acronyms. So with that, you wrote this cool new book about mentorship. So hold it up. Let's see the copy of the
I
book.
will. Oh, now I have to be careful because our brief and rather deranged former Prime Minister Liz Truss appeared on Fox News last week, and she did this. She said, "Here's my new book,"
Oh
and
no.
then she did this, and she
Oh no.
held it upside
Tell about
down.
her.
So I'm going to hold it the right way up, and it's a much better book. The
That's
Financial
funny.
Times Guide to Mentoring, which I co-authored with a New Yorker, Dr. Ruth Gotian.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell me, why write about mentorship? Why is mentorship so important, Andy?
It's well, from a personal perspective, why I write about it's been a journey for me, and it was quite interesting. If I realized maybe a year or two ago that my the books that I've written show the journey I've been on over the last 25 years that I've been in this space. Because I've written initially when I ran networking events, I wrote about how to run networking events and how to network and speak in public with my first two books. Then I was working more and more with sales teams, and I wrote a book about referrals. Then I started working with leaders, and I wrote Connected Leadership. And then I got into vulnerability and wrote a book called Just Ask. And mentoring has formed a part of all of that journey, particularly when you start getting into vulnerability. The support that you get from other people is so important. And mentoring is just a way of formalizing that. Not always formal mentoring, to be fair, but it
Mm.
is a way of formalizing that support. So it's an evolution for me personally. Why is it so important that both Ruth, my co-author, and I have experienced that most organizations and most individuals don't really make the most of the potential that mentoring offers to them. They recognize the impact. There was one study by Olivet Nazarene organization where 73% of respondents said they recognized the value of mentoring, but 37% actually had a mentor. So there's a big gap there. And even where
Wow.
people have a mentor, they're not making the most of it. They're not turning up to meetings with a clear agenda. They're not being held accountable. They're not focused necessarily, or not as much as they could be. So we felt that there was a gap in the market for a book that really took put a strong grip on this topic and said this is impactful, it does make a difference, but you have to be a more effective mentor, and you have to be more thoughtful about the way you approach it. You have to be more thoughtful and strategic about the way you ask people to mentor you and you approach that relationship. And organizationally, we have to take more responsibility to advocate more effectively for mentoring and make sure it happens.
Wow. Wow. 73% say that there's a need, and 37%
That's right.
actually have one. That's so
That's a
interesting.
huge
So,
gap.
wow, that's a massive gap. So, with that, let's define mentorship for people, because I think it's important to kind of level set before we go deep.
Totally. I mean, there's lots of different ways to approach this question. Everyone has their understanding of mentoring. I'm going to approach it by giving a basic definition, if that's okay,
Yeah,
and
please
then
do.
talk about. I think where a lot of confusion lies. One is in terms of the difference between mentoring and coaching, and I think there is a cross-cultural difference there as well. And then about different types of mentoring. I think it's a hard question to answer just in a snapshot. The snapshot is mentoring is benefiting. If you have a mentor, you benefit from the experience, the expertise, the insights, the perspectives of someone who has that experience or expertise that you lack. So you're benefiting from where someone else can fill in the gaps that you have. Where that might different be different from coaching on a basic level is that a coach might not have that experience or expertise, but they may have the skill set to guide you through to find the solution for yourself, whereas a mentor has the answers. Now, where there's a gray area there is that a good mentor will coach. They'll know the answer. They'll have experience that will inform the answer, but they'll still help you find the answer for yourself. But they'll know where they want to guide you rather than just trying to go on that journey with you. And then the other key part that means that you can't just have a crisp, clean answer is that traditionally we think of a mentor, what Ruth and I call the traditional hierarchical model. So the junior person sat at the feet of the senior person, learning from all their wisdom and expertise. But I don't think that's the modern world. And we see that as a formal relationship. I go and see my mentor every month. The traditional hierarchical model, the formal mentorship models, they're both relevant in the modern day. They both have their place in a mix, because you have reverse mentoring, where the senior person with all the experience is learning about things they don't understand as well from someone more junior to them. Generational differences, sustainability, the digital world would be good examples of that. You have peer-to-peer mentoring, where, both of us, we have similar business models. We're probably at similar stages of our professional lives. We could probably learn from each other rather than one mentor the other. And then sometimes we have those formal relationships, but sometimes it's just picking up the phone to someone in an informal way and having that mentoring team around you that can support you. So probably quite a long, convoluted definition compared to what you wanted, but hopefully you see why I wanted to go down that path.
No, I don't think that's convoluted at all. I think it's important because, if there was just one answer, you wouldn't need a book, right? That would be, really, right? That would be pretty simple to do. Yeah, it would. Yeah, that's right. A tweet or be an article. And I think that's interesting. So let's talk about the informal kind, because I think that's the kind that a lot of us are able to do now because we're dispersed. I don't get to see my mentor like I once did. So informal mentor, is it as simple as just pick up the phone and say, hey, Andy, I need some help? Or how does that work?
It can be, but I think, I talked about being thoughtful and strategic before. You can be thoughtful and strategic around informal mentorship as much as formal mentorship. So I would say, for example, that I have a mentoring team. So I do have a formal mentor. In fact, if you include my mentor supervisor who supervises the mentoring I do with my clients, I have two formal mentors, but informally I have a host of them, but I know who they are. And I know what I turn to them for. Now, that doesn't exclude anyone else who I feel actually Phil's got experience of live streaming. So let me ask Phil about live streaming. And that might be a one-off. But actually, I have one informal mentor who, if I'm writing a new speech, Alan Stevens is the person that I go to. And we will have a formal session, but we don't have a formal session every month. I remember when I started speaking internationally, and I was working with interpreters for the first time, I spoke to a speaker in South Africa who speaks all over the world, Graham Codrington. And I said, what do I need to know about this scenario? And I've spoken to Graham about a number of things over the years. So there are probably half a dozen people in my network who would tick that box for me as an informal mentor, where I don't have a formal agreement that they would mentor me, where they would be just as welcome to pick up the phone and ask for my advice. But if I have a particular question on a particular issue, they're the first port of call for me.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and that's certainly helpful. Still being strategic, though, understanding why, I think that's very, very helpful. So let's talk about remuneration, if you will. Do we pay for mentorship, or is mentorship a free thing, or can it be either one?
This is one of those cross-cultural differences that I mentioned slightly earlier. So writing with an American as a Brit was a really interesting experience. We agreed on 95% of the book. There were a couple of areas we didn't, and this was the biggest, because for Ruth, the thought of paying a mentor is just, it goes completely against the grain. And actually, since we've had that conversation, I've spoken to a number of leading American business thinkers, and they all feel the same way. Whereas I'm a member of the Association of Business Mentors in the UK, which is made up of people who get paid to be mentors. It's what we offer as a service. And I have a range of clients, some of whom pay me for my mentorship, they will tend to be people who pay for my professional expertise. I specialize in professional relationships, and they will come to me for help on professional relationships. And just as with a talk, I get paid to deliver a talk to an audience who want to learn that way. With mentorship, I get paid for that one-to-one work. And I mentor a 17-year-old schoolgirl who's campaigning against bullying and for other social issues. And I mentor some people who are on the first stages of speaking professionally. And I mentor those quid pro quo relationships. So I'll always have a couple of quid pro quo mentorships going on where I'm giving back. They don't tend to be on my core expertise of professional relationships. In the States, and I had a conversation with the team at 100 Coaches a couple of weeks ago, this comes back to the difference between mentoring and coaching, because in the States, what I call mentoring might be called coaching, and that's where that gray area comes in. I might be a little bit more strict about where I see the difference between the two. So I might call myself a coach in the US and a mentor in the UK. But the mentorship for me is because I have experience and expertise in the area.
Yeah, I think as soon as we get specific, I think we move into more of a paid relationship, right? If I just say, hey, Andy, what do you know about relationships? You might hand me your book. You might have a quick 30-minute call with me. But if I'm looking for, okay, Andy, I'm looking for this outcome and doing this, that's typically a coaching relationship. That's the way it is in the US anyway. At least that's what I find. So,
whereas in the UK, we would probably still say mentoring if you have the expertise or the experience.
Okay.
And coaching is the skill set. Coaching is the skill set of asking questions and exploring.
Got you. Okay. That's interesting. That's very interesting. So I was just looking through my notes here on your book. I'm on my phone, and I was thinking, so how do we make sure if there's such a gap, Andy, between 73% and 37% inside organizations, how do we start bridging that gap? How do we get started with this? Because I think that's a hard part to do.
It comes from advocacy and strong advocacy at all levels. And one of the things about writing a book is it cements your thoughts on an issue. And one of the things that really came to the forefront for me when writing this is that advocacy has to come at all levels. So what you'll typically find in many organizations is that one person is tasked with running the mentorship program. It might be someone in HR. It might be someone who is a volunteer on a women's network or another employee resource group. What tends to happen is it tends to be not their core responsibility, not at the heart of their job, and not something that they're really judged on. So it can be downgraded. So that's the first step, is make it core to the delivery. And that should probably be within the HR or learning and development team. Can be within an ERG, that's fine. But it's got to be recognized by the business, which takes me to the second level, and that's the senior level. The senior team, the senior leadership team need to support the mentoring program. They need to support it by being mentors. They need to support it by giving resource to the program and time. They need to support it by advocating for it and talking about their own mentors and their own mentorship experience, not just as mentors, but as mentees. We need to get across the message that there's not a curve where you are mentee, 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 mentor, 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 but you are both at all times. And the senior leadership team lead that discussion. So talking about what their mentors are doing for them and how they're supporting them. And it needs to be supported at peer level. So your line manager says you're being mentored. That's fantastic. I'll support you all the way. You need to take time away from the team to go to your mentoring session or do some work for your mentor. Go for it. And your peers on your team need to support you in doing that as well. So it's got to be within the DNA of the organization. Part of the appraisal process, having the mentor with the mentee's permission, talking to the line manager so that they understand what the appraisal says and what the development objectives are and can work towards them. So it's a joined up, thought through effort. And if that mentorship is sewn into the DNA of the organization and everything else that happens, and it's expected, and it's accessible, people know where to access it and how to access it, and the matchmaking is thoughtful and really tied to those development objectives, then it's going to work. But that requires effort, and it requires some culture change in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I as you're talking, I'm thinking that's definitely a culture shift. That
Oh,
whole,
totally.
talk to a manager. I don't know. Because I'm going to come to you, Andy, and I'm going to tell you things that make me feel kind of bare and vulnerable. So I don't know how that's going to work.
Okay. So there's two different things here. There's having your manager as a mentor, which doesn't work. And very often when you turn to your manager and say, I need a mentor, their response is going to be, I'll mentor you. Now, they can be part of your mentoring team, but they shouldn't be your formal mentor for the reasons that you said. There's a conflict of interest there, and you cannot be fully vulnerable with your manager. And a mentor should be vulnerable with their mentee as well, and that can't happen either. So I always have suggested that your mentor should be, if they're in the same organization, which they don't have to be, but if they're in the same organization, they should be at least one step to the left or right and one or two steps up, unless it's a reverse mentoring relationship. But the key is that there's no conflict of interest. What I'm talking about is getting your managers buy-in to the fact that you are in a mentoring relationship, support finding that mentor and support working with that mentor. And the other point that I made there, which you may be referring to, is with the mentee's position, the mentor talks to the manager. There are conversations you can have, and there are conversations that are confidential, and that's where you've got to have an open communication, so that it may not be that I wouldn't expect the mentor to report back everything to the line manager, but the mentor needs to know this is what the line manager says you need to achieve. And sometimes it's helpful if they can have a conversation, but the mentor needs to be very mindful about what they can share and what not.
Yeah, well, that alignment is so important, not just organizationally, but to your point, right, up and down and sideways. Because if everybody has a mentor, now it's not seen as a weakness. If everybody has a coach, now it's not seen as a weakness, and it's not something that only executives get. I think that's another point that you make. So at what point do people get mentored, Andy? Is it early on? Is it later on? When does that happen?
Well, it's interesting you said it's that only executives get, because actually part of our problem is exactly what you say. When do we get mentored? And there's only one or two sweet spots where people think it's appropriate. And it seems to be people on a talent program get mentored to get to the next level, and new executives to get to the next level. When actually it should be everyone. It should be right the way up to the CEO. Everyone should be mentored. Ruth and I have just co-authored an article on why CEOs need mentors, because too often the thought is, now I'm here to mentor everyone else, when actually you reach a senior level and suddenly you're isolated at the top. The colleagues that you've laughed and joked with and looked to for support are now looking at you through a different lens, and you can't have the same conversations with, and you need that backup, that support around you, but it'll have to come from outside the organization or outside the division very often. So it is at every single level. There is no simple answer to when should I get a mentor. You get a mentor when you're ready. I'm mentoring a 17-year-old schoolgirl. She's alert to the need to have a mentor. There are huge programs for youth mentors. And there are huge programs for executive mentors. Why should there be a big gap in the middle of that? There's no reason why. At every stage in our lives and every stage of our career, we need help getting to the next step, and we need help getting through what we're wading through to get there. So why not ask for that help all the time?
Yeah. Well, wading through what we're at, I think that's often pride. I think I should have to know my job well enough, when in fact, people are different. That chemistry, if you will, of the people always makes that different. So with that, Andy, what are some of the pitfalls that come with mentorship?
Well, you touched on one, partly in that question and partly in your comments a bit earlier, and that was not being seen as vulnerable. And seeing vulnerability as a weakness, that's the problem. That's the mindset issue. Vulnerability is a strength. Saying that I can have support around me is a strength. It's a strength because it takes strength to say, I'm not perfect, I don't have all the answers, or I would benefit from someone else's insights. And you get stronger as a result of the insights that you gain. So that's one major pitfall. The next pitfall, and it's very much related to that, is both mentor and mentee try to impress each other. So we don't have vulnerability in the session. We only grow when we expose, where the weaknesses are, so that we can address them. If you cut your arm and you go into the hospital and you've already bandaged it up and you say, well, you don't need to see that, well, your arm's not going to get fixed, is it?
No.
So we have to expose the wound. And very often we'll learn from the mentor's own experiences, which means they have to not worry about impressing as well. There's a quote, I think I share it in the book, from Dame Catherine Granger, the chairwoman of UK sport, former Olympic rowing and world rowing champion. She was quoted in a Sunday Times article a few years ago, where she said, "You don't want your coach to sugarcoat it for you." So we need that ability to have open, honest conversations. Another pitfall, I touched on it earlier, is a lack of strategic thinking, planning, and accountability. So why are you being mentored? Don't just find a mentor because I say you should have a mentor. Find a mentor because you have an objective, a goal. You've identified something you need to work on, and find the right person who can be the right fit for that, and then talk about that with them. Communicate what you want to achieve. Communicate how you'll recognize success. Communicate progress all the way through. Let them hold you accountable and constantly review, because if you've got a really good mentor, your objectives might change. What you thought was your goal might not be your long-term goal if they help you see things through a different lens. So that constant objective setting, strategizing, review, accountability is key, and it doesn't happen often enough.
Yeah, well, it's not purposeful enough, I think, to your point, right? If it's not ingrained in part of the culture, it doesn't happen. I think that's, kind of oversimplifying, but I think that's it. So let's answer Todd's question here. Todd says, wants to know about the relationship between mentor and recommendations for structured training and upskilling within an organization. Any thoughts on that, Andy?
I assume, Todd, you mean the relationship between the mentor and the mentee, which is an interesting piece in itself, an interesting space in itself, because there's this argument about whether you turn to someone you know as a mentor or someone you don't, someone you like. Do you need to like? Is more important than knowing them, than liking them. And in fact, if you like each other too much, that might influence the relationship negatively, because you might not open up as much to them because you want to impress your friends. You want them to still think good things about you. You might engage in too much small talk and not get down to the nitty gritty. Now, small talk and a common bond is important. It's important to know the person as well as the objective. Common values are key. Seeing the world through the same lens is important. Common beliefs aren't as important. And a key part of the relationship, and this goes to the mentor's vulnerability, is it should be the okay for the mentee to say, I hear you, I've weighed up what you've suggested, but I'm going a different route, and for the mentor to be okay with that. It's about respecting but not bowing to your mentor. So there's all these different things to weigh up, but I think that overall I would advocate for someone you respect, who you will listen to, and who you can get down to business with, but who you feel comfortable with, comfortable opening up with, comfortable in conversation with. But you don't have to like them. I happen to get on very well with my mentor, and we actually, the first time we sat down for a formal mentoring conversation was over lunch in a really nice, you'd love it, traditionally English restaurant, very traditionally English restaurant in the Strand in central London. And I had to say to him, the next time, I don't mind having lunch, but the mentoring session has to be in your office. We can have lunch before or after, but it wasn't conducive to a business conversation, to a focused transactional conversation. So have lunch and then go back to the office, or go to the office to have the mentoring session and then go for lunch. So I think that was a really good example of getting that balance right. In terms of Todd's question about upskilling within an organization and structured training, Ruth and I found that there wasn't a lot of structured training available for mentoring. The Association of Business Mentors in the UK, which I mentioned earlier, is the best that we have found globally at this stage. They offer master's level training for mentorship, and I'll share a link with you at the end to our book website, and on there we have a resources page including the links to those sessions. Ruth, my co-author, has 2 LinkedIn learning courses on mentorship as well that are very, very good. And there are other courses that we provide links to. So I'm happy to provide that link at the end. And then if you go to the resources tab, you'll find all of those.
Cool. Well, before I ask the last question, you read my mind there. I'm going to share that website for folks that they have it. It's at mentoring-guide.com, mentoring-guide.com. You can get a copy of the book. You can learn more about this. Andy has a lot of resources there. I checked it out. A lot of great stuff there, Andy. So last question here before we ask how to get in touch with you, and that is this. I want a mentor. How do I start asking that question?
Be clear, first of all, what you want to mentor for. It goes back to what I said earlier. Be really clear about your objectives. Once you've got clarity about that, ask yourself who demonstrates success in that space, who has the experience you're looking for or the expertise and has demonstrated it in a way that really resonates with you. If you know them, again, this was the other point of disagreement with Ruth, and I think it's a very personal thing. Ruth and a number of other leaders, it's not just standalone with Ruth. And again, it might be a British versus US thing. I don't know. Strongly believes you don't ask someone to become your mentor. Someone else who believes that, who you may know, is Dory Clark, fantastic leadership.
Yeah, I know Dory. Yeah.
So, and I understand exactly where they're coming from, because it can make for a very awkward conversation. I differ. I have asked people to be my mentor. Some have said yes, some have said no, but I've been okay with a no, and that's really important. Don't take it personally. There are good reasons why people would say no, and I don't feel anyone's felt uncomfortable by me asking. And similarly, people have asked me to be their mentor, and I've said yes and I've said no, but the relationships have continued. So my personal approach is that you can ask. It's better to ask if it's someone you have an established relationship with. I think if I turn around and asked someone I'd never met before to be my mentor, it would be a bit weird, be a bit strange. But if we take Ruth and Dory's line, ask for some help, ask for some advice, give some feedback on what you've done as a result, build the conversation over time, build the space where they become your mentor. Now, they may become part of your mentoring team, an informal mentor at that stage. If at that point you feel it can evolve further and it feels naturally, tell them, look, I really appreciate the advice and support you've given me. I know you're a busy person, but I would really love to be able to sit down with you once a month and just reflect and review and just help me on this journey to get to this stage. Now, we talked earlier, and you mentioned it, about having precise objectives from your mentorship. If you were to say, could you help me get to the next level? And can we focus on that? Then that gives them a defined outcome, defined time, and that may make it easier for them. So that may be an approach that you could take. If there's no one that springs to mind, ask your network. Ask people around you, who do you think would be a good fit for this? And if you're still not getting results, start looking outside to people who really stand out for you. And take that approach I talked about just asking their advice on something. How would you approach this? But the most important thing in all of this is, if you ask, whatever you ask, be okay with a no. Don't take it personally. I talk about the 3 reasons we don't ask for help in the book, as I do in a lot of my other work. And the third one is, and I've talked about being vulnerable being one, that's my second one. The third one is that we assume people will say no, and then we assume that it's personal when they do. Don't assume people will say no. Give them the privilege of doing so. And if they do say no, be okay with it. There may be 100 reasons why. And if you're asking people you've got a strong established relationship with, then you shouldn't be the reason why.
Yeah. Well, and that gets back to your first point. Don't be attached to the outcome, right? Be not attached to the outcome and have that. So that's awesome. Again, this is Andy Lopata. Mentoring-guide.com is a copy of the book. But Andy, if people want to get connected with you more, read some of your articles, where else could they go? Where should they connect with you?
Yes. Well, I've got a monthly blog on psychologytoday.com. So you can look on there, on my website, which I'll share with you in a second. I've got the Connected Leadership podcast, which is out every Monday. So today's episode is with Telly Leung, who played Aladdin on Broadway and was in Glee. really fantastic conversation with Telly. So I have some amazing guests on the Connected Leadership podcast as well. So there's two places I would point you. My website is lopata.co.uk. As you can see, the spelling of my name, lopata.co.uk, or andylopata.com if you want to keep it American. And then my link tree is linktr.ee/Andy Lopata. linktr.ee/Andy Lopata. And if you go there, you've got links to my books, to my podcast, to my Psychology Today blog, and more. There's also on mentoringguide.com, you've got a mentoring assessment, so you can check the impact of your mentoring relationships as they are at the moment. And if you go to the link tree, there's a couple of other assessments there as well that you can take.
Wow. Brilliant, Andy. Great stuff. The book is fantastic. I have a PDF copy. I got it early. Love the book. And I'm really grateful for the time you spent today, Andy. I'm not attached to the outcome, but I just want you to know this was a great show, man. It was even better than I expected. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Phil. I've really enjoyed it. We've been social media friends for so long, but it's ages since we spoke. So it's been great
indeed
to connect this way as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you.
You too.